to The Hobbit Part 2. We're going to start with... oh, wait, I don't think it started yet. If it has... Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Hobbit Part 2. We're going to be... I'd just like to welcome everyone. I'm going to start with the Misty Mountain song from the Rankin Bass version. For those who don't know, the Rankin Bass was an animated version of The Hobbit made in 1977. I tried playing it yesterday, but I was told that it didn't come out well, so we're going to start with that to give people a chance to enter the stream. So for those who just joined, that was the Misty Mountain Cold from the Rankin Bass Hobbit movie. For those who are just joining us who missed yesterday's stream, we left off with the dwarves have come into Bilbo's home and are trying to convince him to join in the adventure. At this moment, Bilbo is passed out cold after hearing he might not come home, and he is lying down by the hearth. And that is where we pick up. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best. One of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to Old Took's great-granduncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Greenfields, and knocked their King Golfimbul's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same time. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentle descendant was reviving in the drawing-room. After a while, and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he heard, Gloin speaking. "Humph!" or some snort more or less like that. "Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shrink like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives, and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts." He looks more like a grocer than a burglar." Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you are talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing," this is what he called being on his dignity, "that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of the east, and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great-great-granduncle once Bull Roarer took, and yes, but that was long ago," said Gloin. "I was talking about you, and I assure you, there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday tea time." "Of course there is a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for a very good reason. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal." He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows, till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar, or a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this." On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. "This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin," he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questions. "It is a plan of the mountain." "I don't see that this will help us much," said Thorin, disappointedly after a glance. "I remember the Misty Mountains well enough, and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath, where the great dragon bred." "There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin, "but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if ever we arrive there." "There is one point that you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see that ruin on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the lower ruins? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of this book, and you will see where the ruins are in red. For those who wish to see the map... The map. Oop, there we go. You can see the map. And there is the Misty Mountain, the Lonely Mountains. There, very good. All right. Moving on. "It may have been secret once," said Thorin, "but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about these caves." "He may, but he can't have used it for years and years." "Why?" "Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes. But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale." "It seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country road with all his favourite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf. But in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and he handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far, we have had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it, through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too. Far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off and therefore legendary. This is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins the burglar. The chosen and selected burglar. So now let's all get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Thorin, supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas of suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and so forth. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our songs? And haven't we been talking about all this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he, obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudently and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops, and in addition I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smith and reward even the least skilful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Although those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvellous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them. And they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current value. And they can't even make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountains creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off we saw the dragon settle on a mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods they all went up in fire. By the time all the bells were ringing in Dale and the warriors were arming, the dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam, and fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story, it was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front grate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. After that there were no dwarves left inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, he has piled it all up under a great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined, all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug. And there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they had got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that he went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best we could, and down the lands often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we have had a good bit laid by and are not so badly off, here Thorin stroked the gold chain around his neck, we still mean to get it back and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about. But apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why it had not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria, by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April 100 years ago last Tuesday, and has never been seen by you since, said Thorin. Never has been seen by you since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard, slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin, and we must give a thought to this necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together, if they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough task for you." "Hear, hear," said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. "Hear what?" they all said, turning towards him. And he was so flustered that he answered, "Hear what I have to say." "What's that?" they asked. "Well, I should think that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something, and, well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed and an early start and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go." "Before we go, I suppose you mean," said Thorin. "Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey. Fried, not poached, and mind you, don't break 'em." After all the others had ordered their breakfasts, without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for all of them, and filled all his spare rooms, and made beds on chairs and sofas, before he got them all stowed, and went to his own little bed very tired, and not altogether happy. One thing he did make up his mind was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the bedroom next to him. "Far over misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long-forgotten gold." Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. End Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the rooms, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after all to think that they had all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up, but with never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whisper loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast and whatever you call it at 10:30. They left you the message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You are not all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own note-paper. This is what he read. "Thorin and Company, to burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives, if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp. Trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You will have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his merry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater, just on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the other came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I've come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until after 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwalin, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for a hat, I've a spare hood and cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to a start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May, on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf very splendidly on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, where they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but still he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone on far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles, with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May as can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had been obliged to camp where they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea-time. It was pouring with rain and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, the pony was tired and stumbled on stones, the others were too grumpy to talk. "And I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time that he wished that. Still the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the grey clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its bank bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge for the river, swollen with the rains. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the grey clouds, and wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper, and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not only did they notice that Gandalf was missing. Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most. But now he simply was not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful too," groaned Dory and Nori, who shared the hobbits' views about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees and thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip, drip, drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of almost anything, wind or no wind. But they could not do it that night, not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out again, Fili and Kili were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off him. Of course it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. There they all sat, glum and wet and muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire and quarrelling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures are not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there!" There was a hill some way off with trees in it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees, they could now see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as it might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could but go and see, and anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all the night. Others said, "These parts are none too well known, and are too near the mountain. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use, things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and the less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where has Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we have a burglar with us," they said, and so they made off, leading their ponies, with all due and proper caution, in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, and there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm. And do what they could, they made a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of mumbling and dratting, as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. And this is where we will pause for tonight. I'm sure those of you who may be familiar with the story know what's coming next. Those who don't, you will find out tomorrow. Please leave your feedback. I'm thinking maybe moving to 4 p.m. Eastern. That way it'll be a little more reasonable an hour, only 11 o'clock in Israel for those who want to stay up for the whole thing. Please you can either message me privately, or I'll be sharing a YouTube link to the playlist where I'm putting all the videos together. You can comment once I post the link what time you think. So it'll either be around 4, 5, or 6 tomorrow. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. All of you have a wonderful day. Have a great night. Bye.